This is Robert Jones, and today I'm going to discuss a topic from my book, The Top 25 Civil War Spies and Irregulars. And this is actually number 2 on the Confederate side, which is a guy by the name of William Bloody Bill Anderson. Anderson was a guerrilla who operated on the Kansas-Missouri border. Sometimes he got into central Missouri. But at the beginning of the war, 1861, 1862, Anderson and his brother essentially were common horse thieves in Kansas. But by the summer of 1863, Anderson joined with Quantrill's raiders and was soon made a lieutenant. Now, the photograph you're looking at was actually a death photo, which was a popular thing to do back in the 19th century. It was taken on October 27, 1864 in Richmond, Missouri, and it was taken the day that he was killed by federal forces. So probably one of the most important formative moments of Anderson's life, at least in terms of his time as a guerrilla, was on August 13, 1863. His 14-year-old sister was killed in a makeshift prison in Kansas City. Now, this prison was holding several girls who'd been arrested for giving aid or comfort to Quantrill's raiders. Well, unfortunately for all concerned, this makeshift structure collapsed and killed Anderson's sister. And on August 21st, 1863, a mere 8 days later, Quantrill launched his raid on Lawrence, Kansas, and Anderson was there as a lieutenant in charge of 40 men, including Frank James. Some sources say Jesse James was there also, although he would have only been 16 at the time. Now, according to Cole Younger, Anderson personally killed 14 people as part of the raid, which I'm sure Bloody Bill Anderson viewed as vengeance for what had happened to his sister. After the raid, the winter of 1863-1864, Quantrill and his band wintered in Texas. Some bad blood arose between Anderson and Quantrill. Anderson wanted to get married to a woman in Sherman, Texas, but Quantrill told him that he should wait until after the war. Well, Anderson went ahead with the marriage anyway, and Quantrill and Anderson would go their separate ways. So it was at that point that Anderson became head of his own guerrilla band. The biggest moment of Anderson's life in terms of his career as a raider occurred on September 22nd, 1864, with his raid on Centralia, Missouri, where a couple amazing things happened, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. The morning was the raid on the town itself. Anderson led his guerrilla band, there were between 300 and 400 of them, into attacking Centralia. As they were doing the attack, a train pulled into the depot or into the station in Centralia. Anderson ordered that 23 Union soldiers be pulled off of the train, and on his direct order, they were lined up and killed by a firing squad. This is one of the most notorious massacres of the whole Civil War. But his day wasn't ended, because that afternoon, Anderson and his men were attacked by a Union column, probably about 120 soldiers. There were actually 175 all told, but something in the range of 30 to 40 were kept behind to keep an eye on supplies, whatnot. So it ends up with about 120 soldiers, federal soldiers, facing Anderson and his 300 to 400 men. Anderson and his followers totally wiped out the column. They killed 108 of the 120 troops that they faced. So this is a 90% kill rate, not just a 90% casualty rate. Not too long after, October 26, 1864, Bloody Bill Anderson was killed in Albany, Missouri by forces under Union Lieutenant Colonel Samuel P. Cox. Anderson's forces had actually launched an attack on the federal forces. They met heavy resistance, and most of them retreated, leaving Anderson and one other man to continue the charge by themselves. They were cut down. Anderson died. As I mentioned earlier, it was popular at the time to do death photos. Anderson's remains were photographed, and then he was dragged through the streets in Richmond. And two other quick notes before we end our quick look here at Bloody Bill Anderson. As I mentioned, Cole Younger, many years after the war, wrote his autobiography, and he said that Quantrill sometimes spares, but Anderson never. So we oftentimes look at William Quantrill as the most bloody of all the irregulars of the war, but I think probably Anderson surpasses him. Continuing with what Younger said, Quantrill sometimes spares, but Anderson never became a tradition of the Kansas line. Before he died in a skirmish with Northern troops in 1864, he had tied 53 knots in a silken cord, which he carried in his buckskin pouch. Every knot represented a human life. One other note to make here is, if you remember the film The Outlaw Josie Wales with Clint Eastwood, when Eastwood's homestead is burned by Northern troops, and Eastwood is on the ground holding his wife, his dead wife, in his arms, and a man rides up on a horse and introduces himself. That man is indeed Bloody Bill Anderson.